Thank you. Thank you so much to Aloisa. And we're so glad you all are joining us today. That was truly inspirational. And welcome back. Welcome back. We're at the top of the hour now. So for those coming in and out, just a brief reminder that the Zoom links for all of our sessions and breakout sessions are on the Aurora Institute Symposium website. They're in the program book link there and also in your email from this morning. Feel free to type comments, insights, and share in the chat and share your learning on hashtag Aurora 2020. Next slide. Now we will transition from our incredible first three speakers to three more truly amazing speakers on bright spots, keynotes of initiatives of this work actually happening. So I'm going to kick us off on this session with some high-level thoughts. And what comes to mind is this quote, that every system is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And if you were designing a modern education system fit for purpose, what would it look like? It wouldn't look like what we have today, one size fits all, a system whose end goal is to rank and sort kids. It's oppressive by design. It allows students to be prisoners of time, moving through with variable learning outcomes. And on a static of seat time, factory bell schedules. It boils down their 12 years of school to a GPA where learning is only recognized within formal institutions that were designed with inequitable structures. What would your designs look like? Please feel free to go into the chat. What would your designs do? What would they look like? I would ask youth, learners, communities, educators, what are their hopes and dreams? What is the purpose of the education system, its goals and aims, and get explicit on what you want students to know and be able to do holistically. And then think about the collective. Think about how would you co-design? What would it mean to be truly student-centered, inclusive, culturally responsive? What does it mean to be competency-based, equity-driven? What does it mean to be personalized? And what would it take for students to truly have agency, to own their own learning, to have a universal, comprehensive learner record over a lifetime, where you advance on mastery, badge your knowledge and skills, micro-credentials, skill up, stack through a lifetime, but have higher goals and purpose? What would assessment that provided real evidence of learning look like, focused on learning? And we'll be talking about all of these in the next 3 days. We are hearing and seeing how we need to define student success to be holistic with the community, with our society's aims in mind. We need to find a way to center policy on purpose and advance reciprocity with communities in how we rethink accountability for a long game, shift systems to be more balanced, culturally responsive, and equitable at every level. We also need to address the horribly inequitable funding models for school finance in this country. We need technology delivery systems that support a vision of anywhere, anytime learning that's student-centered, keeping far better data, holding a portfolio of evidence of student work over a lifetime that's meaningful for students and student-owned. And we need to meet students where they are. We need scaling of culturally responsive teaching, learning, and assessment. We need scaling for inclusive design. We can do this. Just look at what is possible when we come together and take action at every level. I can give you some impact examples. For Aurora, then Rachael, 2 years ago, we had a member of the Washington State House Education Committee in the Washington State Senate recently provide a presentation for the Symposium 2020, the virtual all fall series on building capacity for competency-based education across the state. And in it, they said they got started by attending the then Rachael Symposium National Policy Forum 2 years ago in 2018. They learned how other states were advancing policy, and they heard directly from educators around the country on how they were creating new designs, how they were advancing this vision of student-centered learning in their own communities. Well, they took it back to Olympia, Washington, and shared We followed up with technical assistance and resources that directly led to new legislation and a new statewide pilot for competency-based education. In 2 years, they're seeing big changes. They have competency-based schools. Now they're moving the competency-based education work towards aligning K through 12, higher ed, CTE, career tech ed, and workforce pathways. So awesome, so awesome. And they're lifting up student voices. Part of their legislative work group and task force was student Ashley Lynn. And you'll hear from Ashley Lynn, this student who's part of the task force, during our student panel on Wednesday. We've heard from leaders all over the country, leaders from Eastern Carver School District in Minnesota, giving you a shout out, who attended the symposium a few years ago and returned to their community to implement a new personalized learning model in schools. Our competency workbook, Quality Principles for Competency-Based Education, was used as guiding framework for designing new schools in Aurora, Colorado. And our frameworks are being used by ministries of education around the globe. The New Zealand Ministry of Education is currently using our Student-Centered Learning Information Management System report as the basis for the development of an improved learning platform to serve K-12 education across their country. A nonprofit in Germany is utilizing the Competency Works materials to provide professional learning and support to overwhelmed teachers amid the COVID crisis right now. The state of Nevada is using our national standards for quality online teaching and blended teaching competencies to create professional development for educators. From our quality standards to other published reports, which so many of you who are with us today have contributed to. We really try to democratize the ideas based on what we're learning with the field collectively. There are ripple effects for all of your work. And we surveyed the field this summer and we hear you. Quote, "The time is now for wholesale education reform. I'd like to see the Aurora Institute take the lead and encourage change at every level of our education system." End of quote. So I am humbled by the feedback that we get, and I humbly accept your challenge. We don't do this alone. It is with all of you. We are allied in this cause. Thousands of educators teaching in student-centered learning across the US and the globe are inspiring the future makers of tomorrow to own their own learning, to learn anytime, everywhere, and map their goals for the dawn of their lives. I'm honored to introduce today 3 keynote speakers on the topic, Systems Change, Bright Spots in Driving Collective Change. Oscar Santos, the Executive Director, the Center for Collaborative Education, who will share his work on the power of voice and ownership in designing for equity and excellence. Stacy Caldwell will talk about the vision of what's possible and her work at the CEO of Mastery Transcript Consortium. And Rachael Stevens, the Program Director of Workforce Development and Economic Policy at the National Governors Association, will talk about her work in looking at the future of learning and the future of work. These are examples of bright spots where real work in systems change is taking hold and advancing at all levels. We will have 3 10-minute keynotes and look forward to your comments and questions in the chat. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our first speaker, Dr. Oscar Santos. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Oscar Santos, as Susan just mentioned. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Collaborative Education. We're a national education nonprofit based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and Los Angeles, California. And our mission is very simple. It's to partner with schools, districts, and communities to increase voice and ownership that increase equity and justice. Before I get a little bit into my talk, just want to let you know, prior to becoming the Executive Director at the Center for Collaborative Education, I was a lifelong educator, and it's the job that I've loved the most. To me, teaching is all about leadership. I started my career as an AmeriCorps Fellow, working with students who were disengaged, setting up programs all over the country. Had the honor to be a teacher where I taught English, history, English as a second language, as well as students who language was not, English was not their primary language. As a founding principal for a school that was designed for kids who were all new to the country. We made that school the first early college high school for English learners. I even served as superintendent where the focus was to create an opportunity to learn district based on Pedro Noguera's work and Dr. Starrett's work on opportunity to learn. And even prior to that, becoming the AD, I worked in the what you would call the independent world. Started a school where we worked with students who were economically disadvantaged, and the job was, as a philanthropy-based school, to make sure that all of our students got a great education. As a result, 100% of our students graduated, 100% went on to college, and the college graduation rate for those students was 76.4% in 4 years. I'm fortunate to be at the Center for Collaborative Education because the center has done so much. Interestingly enough, the center started in 1994, same year I started my career as an educator. And they've done some amazing work in terms of building out pilot schools. This whole idea of getting schools to work with the teachers union, superintendent, and basically the district to support schools where there was voice and ownership by all. The center has also done work with the Principal Residency Network. Ahead of its time, again, this was a program to set up teachers and educators who wanted to be principals, and this was all based on a social justice framework to build equity and justice. This was, these two programs were expanded all the way into the West Coast. And in addition, this recently, in the last couple of years, we've really been focusing on assessments and how to use assessments to be equitable. So what I'm here to do today is to talk a little bit about the power of voice and ownership and how we can really design systems change. If you really think about this, the whole idea of power of voice and ownership, if there's one thing I want you to remember is that when you give people voice and ownership, they are 4 times more likely to be productive. They feel respected, they feel cared for, and they feel that this is something that they want to do and not just something that is being delegated towards them. If we can just please go over to the slides, that might be helpful. If we go to the next slide, that'd be great. So the Center for Collaborative Education has had an opportunity to really look at voice and ownership as we look at how we define looking at 2 key challenges. One is diversity for teachers. And I want to just give you a little context here. If you look at all the school systems throughout the country, and you look at the portion of teachers that equals or exceeds the portion of students by percentage, I want to just give you a little glimpse of what this looks like. For Latinos, you can hit the slide. 0.1% of school districts have the equal representation of Latinos. Next bullet, please. For Asian students, 4.5%. This is nationally. For Blacks, 7%. And here it is, for white students, 99.7%. That is an amazing stat. Now, we know that this is a challenge, but inherently, what we're telling our students is that if schools are the places that are going to support equity and justice and diversity and inclusion, we really need to do something totally different. So the center put together our framework. If you can hit the next slide, please. Something that's important to us is this collective ownership model. And the whole idea of our collective ownership model is how do we support systemic change? And we have 3 key tenets. And we use these 3 key tenets to think about this in terms of teacher diversity. Again, the first thing we did was engage the community to build voice and ownership. When you look at the research, it's pretty simple. We know the facts. We know that when students have teachers that look like them, that understand them, that come from their communities, amazing things happen. Grades go up, engagement goes up, discipline goes down. We also know that it's important to leverage the community through their assets. When we did these discussions, we had so many amazing examples that came forth of coaches, teachers in the community, people in the churches. And I want to give you a specific example when we did these conversations. There was a gentleman who, when we asked him who was his favorite teacher, he said it was an 8th grade substitute. He said that person was there for 2 weeks. And when we asked him why that person was his favorite teacher, he said, because that person knew me. They got on the bus with the students in the morning. And more importantly, that person inspired them because they knew that they wanted to be like that person. So when we step back, we say, how do we look at building capacity to support leaders? So we wrote a grant with the Department of Education to address the collective ownership model for teacher recruitment. What we basically did was we said, where are all these amazing leaders? If you can click to the next slide, we figured it out. All these amazing young people are at the high schools, they're at the colleges, they're at all over the place. And it is our opportunity to really design in an equitable way to support young people to become educators. For the first time in the United States, over 51% of the students are in our community colleges. And what does that tell us? It tells us that we have an opportunity to create teacher leaders from an early age, as early as high school to college. Within our grant, what we've done is not only have we identified who these students are, we're also looking at what are the needs and what are the challenges that they have. And the challenges are real simple. They're economic, they're the fact that they're first generation, and they're also the fact that they need support beyond the traditional manner. If you look at the ages of these students within the college system, if you can click to the next slide, we understand that close to 80% of these students are close to over the age of 20. And yet they have so much potential. Close to 40%, 44% are over the age of 25. And if we look at this applied framework where we get mentors and support these students through their community college process, we know that those students will be successful, and we're excited about doing that work because it's about building a pipeline that's equitable, that's supportive, and that is responsive. Again, the data shows that when students have teachers that look like them, that understand them, that come from their communities, wonderful things happen. So you're probably wondering, wow, Oscar, that's a great idea. If you do that well, and if the center continues to push this work in an amazing way, in a number of years, we'll have a more diverse teacher pipeline. That's right. That's about equity and building for the long term. But I also want to talk to you about a different approach that we have. If you can click to the next slide, please. It's something that is so near and dear to me. And it's something that we're working on right now. It's an adaptive challenge that is called the Reciprocity Project. And reciprocity meaning the mutual exchange of wonderful things, ideas, experiences to support each other in a mutual way. To me, the Reciprocity Project began over 40 years ago. When I was a young man, I had an amazing opportunity to go to summer camp. And in that summer camp, there were these two amazing teachers. They wrote grants. They did everything to organize this summer camp. But they also did one thing that was amazing. Everybody that worked at that summer camp was either from the community or represented the kids from that camp. It was such an amazing process where I've met some of the best friends and some of the most wonderful people. And that's actually what made me want to become an educator. You fast forward that to a number of years, those two teachers that designed that summer camp and provided all those opportunities, one of them went on to become an amazing principal. He designed the first school that was a pilot school. At the time, that school became a blue ribbon school, an amazing school, and has been a mentor to me for many years. In addition to that, he did high school redesign work throughout the country. And that gentleman is Mr. Larry Myatt. He's one of the members of the Reciprocity Project. By the way, he was also the co-founder of the Center for Collaborative Education. You want to talk about small coincidences? If you fast forward to 2019, a year ago, I was in October in Washington, D.C. at a convening looking at amazing schools and how do we design schools to support young people. While there were a lot of amazing speakers, there was one gentleman who truly stood out to me. He was talking about the idea of social determinants and how we need to redesign schools with students and the community are the assets and the drivers that drive change. So for the last year, pre, during, and of course, after the pandemic, Tony, myself, and Larry, and our three organizations are grappling with this key question. Can reciprocity be the accountability and a driver for new kinds of schools? So you're wondering, what have we done? Before I get there, I have to let you know that we have three basic assertions. The first one is that the primary role of schools should be to make their communities healthier, happier, and more prosperous. Unfortunately, that does not happen throughout the United States. We know that in many ways, as Tony mentioned, and as other of our speakers prior to me have mentioned, school is a win-lose proposition. And it's also not inclusive. We no longer can afford to take these models that have been discussed earlier, where we have students sitting in rows, not connected, where they don't have voice and ownership and are able to really be a part of the community and drive change. And last but not least, this has been so highlighted throughout the pandemic, that schools truly are the places where race, economic, and social justice needs to be addressed. And unfortunately, they are letting us down, and we need to push for that. So based on these basic assertions, we have had a series of convenings. If you can click to the next slide, please. We've had times where myself, Tony, and Larry, over the last year, have spent time addressing these issues. And then we knew that we needed to address this with friends. So we gathered reciprocity allies, all the way from California, our biggest state, to Rhode Island, the smallest state in the union, as well as Hawaii. And in these convenings, we talked a lot about what are the social determinants? What are the challenges that are holding students back? Healthcare, technology, lack of resources. We talked about the big elephant in the room, racism, the fact that students are marginalized based on race, and in some cases, higher suspension rates, less access to high-level classes. And in many ways, all of that based on an ineffective model for school, which again is warehousing students and saying, here are the things you need to learn, disconnect them, and not connect them through our connections. So we have understood that through community asset development, there is this amazing opportunity to redefine schools. After these 4 convenings, we brought our reciprocity allies together, had a broader convening to figure out ways to address how social determinants and racism impact each other, how the ineffective model of school can be addressed by getting the community involved, because we know that voice and ownership is really what's going to drive the work. So you're probably wondering, what's next? What are Tony, Larry, I, and the Reciprocity Project going to do? If you can go to the next slide, please. It's simple. For us, in addition to doing blogs and bringing allies together, our key next step is to make sure that we go back to the voice and ownership, to the families, to the students, and to people in community to say, what is your vision for a new school? How do we find leaders? And when we say leaders, we're not just talking about educational leaders. We're talking about those community organizers, activists, community members, businesses, to look at schools that are in service to their communities. And last but not least, we want to enlist you as reciprocity allies. As I close out, I leave you with where I started. When you start with voice and ownership, you're able to get people to be invested in the work. We are moving beyond the 3 R's of reading, writing, and arithmetic. Our goal is to look at respect, relationships, and reciprocity. And we're excited to do this work with you. Thank you.
Oscar, thank you so much. And just in the spirit of rising up on collective action and communities, this is such an incredible project that you're taking on this vision for systems change. And it really is about inclusive voices and ownership and reconsidering the future. I hope that we can, in our collective network, rise up and join you as allies to embed this work and honor students, families, communities, really drawing on local wisdom to drive this idea of reciprocity and balanced power on the future of our system. So thank you so much. I will now turn it over to Stacy Caldwell, again, another example of a bright spot of an initiative that's happening across so many schools and districts around the country for Mastery Transcript. Stacy, over to you.
Great, thank you, Susan. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to Susan and the Aurora Institute for including us in this conversation with Oscar and Rachael. We're thrilled to be here. I also like to just share my appreciation that I saw others echo earlier for the opening from Rebecca, Tony, and Catherine. I think they did an amazing job of not only framing up the conversation for this conference, but frankly was a really good Monday morning call to action reminding us why we all do this work. Let's see. So let's see. Is my screen being shared right now?
It says it started sharing, but we're not seeing the slide quite yet. I don't know if there's a
Let me
delay.
try that. Let me try that again. Perhaps I
Sure.
delayed a little too long. There we go. Is that showing?
Great.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Fabulous. So we are the Mastery Transcript Consortium, or the MTC, which is a growing network of public and private schools who are transforming the high school experience and introducing a digital high school transcript that tells the story of each student's unique strengths, interests, and abilities. We really see our role in the ecosystem as helping build some sustainability around the shifts that Catherine described earlier this morning, build some sustainability for the sorts of schools that Oscar described and that frankly were being described in the vision statement in the chat, which I was loving. We are a growing organization. We currently have over 350 member high schools, including over 100 public schools. And our purpose really is to ensure that each and every student not only has access to high quality mastery or competency-based learning, but that their strengths, abilities, and interests can be demonstrated and utilized as part of their unique career and learning pathway. And if I can echo back to something that Tony was mentioning, really starting to value what each student is doing and moving us towards that egalitarian paradigm that he talked about. We all know that mastery learning matters, and I have loved listening to the chat as folks have been chiming in on different elements. But a system that is supported by well-defined credits, learner agency, fully personalized support are important steps forward. And our schools are working to create these sort of rich, authentic learning experiences that allow students to define and expand their passions and skills. When schools really partner with their communities to allow students to solve real-world problems, when schools introduce a range of learning experiences and students customize their work to align with their passions, that work is truly powerful and transformative for students. Students see and feel the shift in their learning, quite frankly, as Jacob's quote demonstrates here. And interestingly, in this particular moment, schools and students that have embraced mastery learning have found that they're really better prepared to navigate this pandemic. They see schools as really more of a sort of range of learning opportunities, and students and teachers have been working to support that learning. However, when you do this sort of work, it doesn't fit into really tidy subject and hours boxes. And the MTC was really founded on the idea that the traditional transcript and the traditional grading system, by which I mean letter grades for single subject work, holds back the type of learning that can be really possible in high school, and oftentimes, sadly, reduces four years of hard work that a student does to a single number, the GPA. So we designed the Mastery Transcript to really be a game changer. We wanted schools to be able to move from a transcript that looks like the one on the left, which is a flat single page that shows where students are granted credit for time spent in a subject, typically a single subject, and where grades have little or no definition, to something like you see on the right, a digital interactive transcript where students are given credit for mastery across a range of cross-disciplinary credits, and where those credits can include things like collaboration, critical thinking, communication, creativity. In short, the Mastery Transcript allows schools and students to demonstrate the incredible work they're doing through rich learning experiences and allow schools to think differently about assessment and really lean into all the rich, authentic ways that we know what students can do. Just to give you a sense for our current progress, last year we had 4 brave high schools and students pilot using the Mastery Transcript for the admission process. With this, well over 100 colleges received and utilized the Mastery Transcript, and students had over 85 offers of admission. We got some really good feedback from the colleges and from the schools as part of that, and we've integrated that feedback into our tools and our process for this year. This year, we are more than tripling. We will have about 14 schools that plan to send Mastery transcripts. So we think that somewhere near 500 colleges should see transcripts this year. So we're working hard to support those colleges, and we're working hard to make sure that students can use these transcripts to send to the colleges, but also to support the wide range of pathways that they may take on. I've been talking a lot about the theory of why we're doing what we do, but wanted to also give you a quick sense for the Mastery Transcripts tools. So let me do a very brief tour of that. We designed the transcript really to allow a reader, be that an admissions reader, someone in the workforce, to really do 2 things. One, we wanted readers to be able to get a rich picture of the student, quickly get that picture, what they've accomplished and what they've focused on. But then second, also to give them the ability to easily dig deeper into any area where they're looking for additional information. So if you take a look at the transcript in the center, you have a summary of the credits that a student has earned. So each of those lines represents an individual credit, all of which are listed down below, where the student has demonstrated mastery to a level defined by the school and has achieved mastery of that credit and earned that credit. That gives the admission officer or anybody else a very quick picture of what's going on. But then the student can also, an admission officer or other reader can quickly gain additional information. So if you look down to a specific credit area, a reader could click in either that credit area or an individual credit and start to see the evidence that a student provided. So not only see how a school defined a credit, but also see the work that the student did. And you can further click into each of those elements and pull out the actual work that a student did. So we think this is a really transformational vision for what folks have been doing with portfolios and turning portfolio from a best hits into really all the work that a student has done in context, and makes it easier for folks to get at and sort of understand that work. As we talk with colleges, we also realize that when schools are doing this rich work, when they're doing transformational, very different visions of school, colleges want to understand what that school actually looks like. So we've worked with high schools and we've created tools for them to be able to really create rich profiles that describe their pedagogy, describe that they are really approaching school. And as schools are putting together their credits, we know that it's important for them to do the work of building the credits that really fit their portrait of a graduate, but they also want to share and hear what other folks are doing and make sure that the work they're doing is aligned with the research and with work that others are doing. So we also created opportunities for folks to browse and see the master credit systems that other schools are utilizing. And we've made it easier for students. So students have their own dashboard that lets them submit evidence, build and preview their transcript, so they have a decent sense for the story that they're telling in their transcript as well. So hopefully all of these, hopefully this gives you a sense that all these tools that we're building are helping high schools and students really richly reflect the work. But as we noted earlier, our real purpose here is to ensure that each and every student actually has access to the rich, high quality competency mastery learning systems. So towards that end, we sort of see our role in the ecosystem and our core work as doing 3 things. At the center is certainly building the Mastery Transcript, but we also are supporting the peer network of high schools as they redesign their work, and we're helping amplify their voices towards broader change. We're also activating higher education and broader path and industry, other folks like the folks that are doing work like Rachael is about to talk about, to make sure that when students have done the hard work and they've turned it into a transcript, that they can actually get value from that work that they're doing. And then we are happy to partner with organizations who are pushing on policy levers and other levers to make sure that we can really turn mastery learning from a side thing that some schools do into something that really all students can experience. So with that, Susan, I'll go ahead and hand back to you.
Thanks, Stacy, and thank you. We're shifting back and forth between different altitudes right now. It's really interesting to see how students can have these varied learning experiences and build up different competencies and skills. You know, we could talk about work-based learning and learning in the community and how those show up when you come back to school. But we're going to shift back a little bit to what we were talking about earlier this morning about ecosystems across ecosystems and pathways, and building on this morning's session, really what states are doing. So with that, I would like to turn it back over to Rachael Stevens, who's joining us from the National Governors Association. Rachael.
Thanks so much, Susan. And I'd like to start just by saying hello, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And I'm really honored to be part of this panel and this really important convening. I'd like to thank Rebecca, Tony, and Catherine, as others have done, for really setting our day and our week and this conference off with a really important call to action. And a lot of the themes that they spoke about this morning are really resonating in our work with governors and states right now. So I'm excited to give you all kind of a high level look at what we're doing and what we're really focusing on, especially as we look toward economic recovery. Oscar and Stacy, thank you also for your comments so far. Some of the specific types of approaches and interventions you've spoken about are things that we've been talking about in our work as well, and really have an important role to play in some of the broader systems transformations that I'll spend a few minutes talking about this morning. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my slides. Let me see. All right, is this working? Can folks see my slides?
Yeah, it's great, Rachael.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, first of all, as Susan mentioned, I'm the program director of the Workforce Development and Economic Policy Program in the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices. And I will quickly give those of you who aren't as familiar with our work an overview of NGA and the NGA Center. The National Governors Association is the only nonpartisan organization representing all of the nation's governors in all 55 states, territories, and commonwealths. I sit in the Center for Best Practices, which is a part of the NGA that is really dedicated to research and consulting services for governors and executive branch leadership. We cover a huge range of policy areas in our work. I'm with the Workforce Development and Economic Policy team, which is really focused on providing policy guidance, research, technical assistance to governors and executive branch leaders, specifically on expanding access to economic opportunity by reducing barriers to economic participation, by fostering economic dynamism and job growth and healthy economic communities, and by providing training and employment opportunities that both meet employers' talent needs and lead to family-sustaining careers for participants. This is really a key priority for governors, as you can imagine, looking ahead to recovery from the pandemic and the recession that we're in right now. But even before that, it's been an area that has seen a tremendous amount of bipartisan support. And I'm going to kind of start today by talking about what we were looking at before coronavirus and some of the changes that we're seeing now in that conversation, and why some of the transformations that you all will be talking about for the rest of this week are so important right now. So I'm going to be focusing a lot of this conversation on an initiative called the Future Workforce Now Initiative, which took place from 2018 to earlier this year to summer 2020. And essentially, when we started this project, we understood that a huge portion of the workforce was going to have their jobs severely impacted by technological disruption, by automation, by other advancements of new technologies in the workplace and new ways technology could be used in work. And we knew that that would mean that a lot of people would need to learn new skills, in addition to already being, in an economic environment, in a labor market environment where, as Catherine pointed out earlier, many, to have the best chance of long-term career success, post-secondary education of some kind is really important. On top of that, there's so much changing so quickly in the way of digital skills, technological skills, and competencies that learners really need to be equipped with for long-term success in the workforce, especially since, as was pointed out earlier, they'll be changing career paths a lot more often. They'll be changing jobs more often than generations before us have done. So that's the understanding we went into this work with. And our goal in the Future Workforce Now initiative over the last 2 years was really to first help state leaders and governors understand what are the technological disruptions taking place. I think up to that point, we talked about this new world of work, this new future of work at a high level without really defining for state leaders who aren't themselves necessarily experts in technologies, what those disruptions really were. And then second, what impact those disruptions are having for work, for workplaces, for employers, as well as workers. And then finally, what that really means for how education and training systems need to transform and how we need to approach some of these questions differently. My team sits within the Workforce Development and Economic Policy team, right? So we were very focused on the longer term career outcomes, but we were working very closely with partners and with a lot of experts, including many who are participating in this conference, experts on K-12 education, on post-secondary education, who are really at the forefront of leading innovations that support some of these longer term systems changes that we'll be talking about. We took a really broad information gathering approach, engaging experts like yourselves in a variety of roundtables with state leaders, leading to a state policy forum. We actually, I'm very proud to say, had 28 states from across the country, all different geographies, political parties, participating with teams of state leaders from across workforce, education, economic development, human services, the business community, coming together to talk about what we had learned over the course of 2 years of information gathering and think about specific actions they could commit to in their states. And then finally, we published a state guide for preparing the future workforce, which we published this summer. Given the time frame I'm talking about here, as you can imagine, we did a lot of great work before we thought a pandemic was even a remote possibility. And the pandemic changed some things, but more than anything, highlighted why some of the things we had identified through this work are so critically important. Before the pandemic, we knew that some of the most vulnerable jobs in this country that were most vulnerable to elimination or severe reduction in job numbers due to automation were concentrated in industries and occupations that paid the lowest wages and in which workers had lower levels of educational attainment. Here on this graph by our partners at McKinsey, you'll see a combination of food services right up there with lowest wages, very high chance of being very vulnerable to automation. You see retail, you see manufacturing, you see healthcare, and you also see that office jobs are not totally safe in this pre-COVID scenario. Administrative jobs, professional services, information management, those are all on here as well. And by the way, education makes this graph too. So this is the picture before COVID, and looking at these industries, we'll come back to this and what the impact's really been more recently. We also knew, and this also comes probably as little surprise and even more alarming in our current context, before COVID-19, the vast majority of the most vulnerable private sector, not vast majority, excuse me, but a large share of the most vulnerable private sector jobs were in small businesses. Many of these jobs at risk of automation, in addition to paying lower wages, were jobs that were offered and provided by smaller employers of firm sizes 100 or less. That means that a lot of these smaller businesses are in the long run at risk of either really needing to undergo significant changes or potentially even disappearing. And that was, again, before we had the impacts of COVID-19 on our economy. And finally, all of you are very familiar with this. It's come up a lot in the conversation, but of course, even before COVID, we knew that workers who were on the younger or older ends of the spectrum, who were Black or Brown, and who had lower levels of education attainment were much more likely to be in a very precarious position economically. And that includes being very susceptible to displacement by automation and technological change in the workplace. And so coming out of this work, before COVID-19, we arrived at 3 critical transformational objectives to prepare the future workforce now. And these really look at not just systems change, but really cross systems change, across workforce training, across education, in public schools and private schools, across education and post-secondary institutions. What needs to change, and what needs to also change in how we provide supports and services to ensure that all people in our communities can really meaningfully engage in education, in training, and in work. The 3 transformational objectives that we identified were: first, building an ecosystem that truly supports and promotes lifelong learning, going back to the idea that that is going to be increasingly critical for to be successful in the future. Second, developing a more agile and technologically resilient workforce, a workforce that not only understands how to use the technologies required in their workplace today, but is going to be better prepared to keep learning about new technologies and to deal with new technologies in their workplace as their work and technologies both evolve over time. And then finally, ensuring that you're really being thoughtful and intentional about connecting learners and workers to the various types of supports that they may need to really be able to participate in the best training programs, best education programs, and in the quality jobs that states are really looking to expand in their own economies. So within these 3 transformational objectives, we got to the 10 pathways, these policy pathways for states that you'll see in this wheel here. And I won't go through all of them right now. I believe in the chat, some links will get dropped to the resource where it lives online. We have an interactive resource as well as a publication, but I do want to mention that some of the pathways here really include concepts like some of the ones that the real experts who spoke before me have shared, things like competency-based learning and credentialing and hiring practices, comprehensive learner records, expanding access through comprehensive supports and building networks that can support learners and making employment connections, all sorts of things that you all have been talking about and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about. What we wanted to do through this work was bring some of these conceptual conversations to a more concrete reality for the state leaders we work with. So within each transformational pathway, we outlined what this pathway can look like and several policy options with specific state examples of things that are being implemented, things that are either proven already or are looking really promising within each of these policy pathways to help state leaders get a sense of exactly what they can do, what they can put on their agenda to make meaningful change and support the types of transformations you all have been talking about at this convening. In this resource, we also recognized the importance of just connecting a lot of pieces in this puzzle. People before me today have spoken about the importance of a vision and the importance of alignment across multiple systems. And we provided in our final publication for this project what I think is an incredibly valuable resource, which is a roadmap for preparing the future workforce now. And really, it's a roadmap for systems change. This is a roadmap to take governors and state leaders through the process they need to go through to be able to identify how are we going to achieve these huge transformational objectives that were just laid out before us? How are we going to prioritize which specific policy pathways we're going to use to get us there? How are you going to implement interventions on the ground and really make this happen? And as you'll see here, it really has to start with that alignment under a shared vision, getting a lot of stakeholders across systems and across sectors, public and private, together. And that's something that we see governors as uniquely positioned to do and to lead on within states. Second is, of course, then actually prioritizing which actions you're going to take. Third, actually identifying the specific strategies, specific interventions. If you say, I want to make sure that I'm closing the digital skills gaps and ensuring equitable access to digital skill training and to technologies and connectivity, what are the specific strategies and policy actions you're going to take to put that into place? And then finally, ensuring that there's a way to support continuous improvement, to gather feedback, and to really use more of a user-centered approach to not only the design, but to the continuous improvement of programs and services that are provided by the state. Again, this really connects. I see so many connections to the work that the prior panelists this morning have been talking about, including the need to make sure that, all the work that you all are doing in education is something that really translates to the workforce, to the future that students will have. And that means engaging employers in the private sector in part of the process. And again, I think that's something where we've seen governors' leadership be particularly effective and show some really promising results. So this was all, again, before COVID. So thinking about where we are now, a lot of the challenges I laid out before have only been laid more bare, become more starkly obvious to all of us. The downturn is accelerating job shedding in a lot of those sectors I pointed out on that initial graph earlier. Pre-existing shortages in the workforce have exposed how much we need to have more agility and availability for rapid reskilling into high demand industries, especially when, there's a crisis like the one that we've experienced. Our workforce wasn't necessarily resilient to all the changes that were being thrown at them at once. And maybe we couldn't have expected that. A pandemic is a, extreme circumstance, but this really highlighted the degree to which vulnerable members of the workforce for communities that historically have been underserved, have not been well served, have been oppressed or left out of economic opportunity, are going to really need extra attention and really, an intentional approach by leaders in state government, federal government, local, you name it, to ensure that they're able to be resilient and that they're not continuously left furthest behind every time we have a recession like the one that we're in now. And finally, of course, we noticed, sure, very relevant for many of you, that we weren't really ready to do online learning, online teaching, to have families needing to access so many services online, to be looking for jobs. And, there are entire families, and again, this gets back to the equity issue, families in certain communities in particular that have really been left out of the learning that's been taking place by students who have been having to learn remotely, and being able to look for worker training opportunities that states have been providing rapidly during the crisis. Due to a lack of connectivity and also a lack of awareness, lack of digital skills, and ability to really interact with technologies or online platforms to do some of these things. So these problems just have become so much more obvious during this crisis. And just to kind of highlight some of the industry impacts that I mentioned, you'll see here several of those industries I pointed out earlier are showing some of the highest proportions of unemployment insurance claimants during this crisis, even as we see some of the new unemployment claims coming back down after a peak early in the summer. A combination of food services, healthcare, and social assistance, manufacturing, retail are still making up large proportions of the people who are filing unemployment claims. And that gets back to, just a data point on that job shedding really accelerating in some of these industries that were already at risk of automation. We're seeing industries starting to take steps in that direction because people can't interact as much or in the same way as they could, for instance. So wanted to share some data points there. And certainly, in terms of those who are already struggling the most, being left further behind. Again, in this crisis, we're seeing what we see really in many of our past recessions, and some trends that we really could have predicted based on how things were looking before the pandemic. The America's unemployed are disproportionately young, female, and Black. And those with less educational attainment are more likely to be unemployed during this crisis, and to be looking for what to do next. And so to really support these workers in identifying what's next and getting back on a path to economic self-sufficiency, or perhaps on that path for the first time, these systems transformations and cooperation alignment across systems can't be an afterthought. It can't be, well, that's not an emergency right now. It's really a top priority. And that's something we're really emphasizing in our work with states right now. In addition, this will really support states' ability to address some of the newer challenges that have been posed. How will employers continue to be motivated to invest in their talent pipelines in the way that they were when the labor market was a little tighter? That's a huge question states are facing right now. How can states dramatically and quickly change how they're delivering training and services in perhaps a prolonged state of partial or incomplete social distancing? How can states best support workers that need it most, especially knowing that they have tighter budgets and widespread unemployment? And a lot of states are really going to be facing some budget challenges starting as early as next year. And finally, knowing that 21st century teaching and learning is here, how can states really just be delivering on all the things, infrastructure, resources, skill sets needed to make sure that we can have true digital inclusion in this future of work and learning? I will briefly share what we're doing now to work with states, building off of the work we had done before the pandemic and looking ahead to recovery. We've been working closely with governors' offices to get their feedback and input on really what their top priorities are, where they are, and where we need to be going. I included a few highlights here, namely that a lot of states are really still in the response and stabilization phase. As we think about recovery and talk about some of these broader systems changes that we all want to see take place, we need to remember that recovery in the fullest sense of that term is probably pretty far off. I feel like I'm bringing the mood down on the Monday morning from where we were, but that it's something really important to recognize. And so we need to do a lot of smart, practical thinking about what are the steps we can help leaders take right now that set us up for the longer term changes we need to see. Second is that there have been a lot of really good innovations. It's not all bad news. There have been a lot of really positive innovations in education and teaching, in workforce training, in job connections, in a variety of areas, and states are already looking at how can I identify what's been working well and really scale that or mimic that in my state. And then finally, we've identified several workforce recovery objectives with states and what they really think, they need the most support in ensuring they're able to work into their longer term recovery strategies. And so that got us here. Going forward, actually starting with a workshop series that begins in a few weeks for state leaders, my team's going to be really working with governors to ensure that as they prepare for their workforce recovery plans, they're thinking about how to, I just bumped my computer, how to expand access and support to essential services, again, to ensure that equitable participation is possible. How to rapidly connect job seekers with work. Some people won't need reskilling right away. They just need an opportunity and to be connected with the right opportunity to get back to work. How to advance digital inclusion and resilience, and how to enhance job quality for all workers, and especially looking at employer-driven strategies to do that. We've seen some states prior to the pandemic taking really positive steps to engage employers in assessing and improving job quality on a lot of meaningful metrics. And so we're going to be looking at how those strategies can be built upon further for longer-term recovery. I'll stop there. I know that we are running a little bit short on time, but I would just like to say thank you again and to just close by reiterating that I kind of walked through at a high level some of what we're thinking about with states, and it has a very workforce centered, kind of focus in our work in particular, but the types of transformations you all are talking about, both at the implementation level and also at the systems level, are right in line with where our state leaders are going, with where they're looking and where they need to be going. And you all are really critical partners in that process. And I cannot reiterate that enough. And that's where I'll close for now. Susan, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And I think it just brings home the importance of this entire conversation about the opportunity to leapfrog right now will require systems change and looking at ecosystems that are much more impermeable through education and the workforce. And these ideas don't have to be at odds. I think what Oscar raises about this idea of reciprocity is that true change is going to happen and have to be driven by local communities. Communities are much more flexible than bigger bureaucracies, but at the same time, governors have a tremendous amount of power to shift the way the work happens and bring people together and bring communities and regional groups together. We're seeing a huge role of intermediaries for building statewide ecosystems across aligning K through 12 education, higher ed, career tech, and into the workforce. And so I just want to thank all of our speakers today. You can see that there is incredible work that is happening in leading these change efforts. The work is grounded in those high leverage points, cultural shifts and changes, examining purpose, examining the values that we hold when we make these change. We're going to be taking a short break. Hopefully we can key up a student video of a student talking about her experience, but I just want to say we're getting ready to go to this transition at the top of the hour into our breakout sessions. And that's going to give everybody who's attending the updated program book is online on our website. We'll drop it in the chat box. You can go to the Zoom breakout rooms, but they are like really specific, digging in on these topics. There's a session on the role of intermediaries in states to build statewide ecosystems. There's a session on assessments for learning. We have Amelia Peterson who's here, who's an expert on what's happening globally in terms of the frontiers of assessment, thinking very differently than the frame that we are really boxed in on in the US that includes recognition of learning and credentials. Catherine Casey will be talking more about her book, so you're able to go deeper All of this depends on high quality professional learning and building educator capacity. And so you can see the range of sessions that we have that include looking at multiple pathways, youth, work-based learning, and apprenticeships. And I love this session, looking at quality frameworks with equity and culturally sustaining school quality reviews. So a range of topics to wrap up the kind of flow of keynotes to bright spots to these breakout sessions. And at the very, very end of the day, because we won't be coming back into the plenary, we will have book clubs with the authors. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Oscar and all of his work at CCE and the Reciprocity Project, Stacy at Mastery Transcript, and Rachael for their work. Thanks for joining us this morning, and please enjoy your breakouts and the opportunities to continue learning and networking with the field. Thank you.